cop is sentenced to death for a crime he swears he didn't commit. With time running out, his loyal German shepherd refuses to move on, sensing something no one else does. Then, just days before the execution, the dog makes a move no one expected, leading to a shocking discovery that could change everything. But will the truth come out in time to save his life? And what secret has been buried for so long that only his dog can uncover? Before we dive into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the packed courtroom, casting harsh shadows across Owen Cooper's face. He sat rigid in the defendant's chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the wooden armrest, his police training doing little to slow his racing heart. The jury filed in, their faces carefully blank, avoiding his gaze. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Martinez's voice cut through the heavy silence. We have, Your Honor. The jury foreman stood, his hands trembling slightly as he held the paper. Owen's eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail like he'd been trained to do. His attorney, James Bennett, stared at his notepad, shoulders slumped in defeat. Across the aisle, District Attorney Peterson's lips curled into the faintest smile. In the back row, Ava Mitchell sat perfectly still, her face unreadable. She'd been his partner for 5 years, but now she looked like a stranger. In the matter of the state versus Owen Cooper, on the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. The word hit like a physical blow. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The jury recommends death by lethal injection, the foreman continued, his voice cracking slightly. Owen clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. His mind raced through the evidence that had sealed his fate. The gunshot residue on his hands, the grainy video showing someone who looked just like him entering West's apartment, the witness who swore she saw him there that night. It was perfect. Too perfect. But he knew the truth. He hadn't killed Daniel West. The bailiffs approached with handcuffs. Owen stood slowly, his legs heavy as lead. As they led him toward the door, his eyes locked onto Ava's. She sat stiffly in her chair, but something flickered across her face, doubt maybe, or regret. Outside the courthouse, Atlas waited with his temporary handler. The German shepherd's ears perked up at the sound of the heavy doors opening. The moment Owen appeared in cuffs, Atlas's whole body tensed. He barked sharply, lunging against his leash so hard that the handler stumbled. Easy, boy, the handler muttered, struggling to hold him back. Atlas barked again, frantic, as Owen was led into the prisoner transport van. The dog knew something was wrong. He could feel it. But Owen didn't look back, couldn't, before the van doors slammed shut. That night, Owen lay on the thin prison mattress, staring at the gray ceiling of his cell. The reality crashed over him in waves. Death row. He was going to die for crime he didn't commit. Across town, Ava unlocked her apartment door, Atlas trailing behind her. She told herself it was temporary, just until other arrangements could be made. But the dog seemed to have other plans. He paced restlessly, nails clicking against the hardwood. Every few minutes he'd stop and whine, staring at Ava with desperate eyes. "He's not coming back, boy," she whispered. But Atlas just resumed his pacing, waiting for a master who wouldn't return. The metal door of cell 2187 slammed shut with a hollow clang that echoed through Owen's bones. The cramped space felt like it was closing in. Bare concrete walls, a narrow cot with a thin mattress, a stainless steel toilet sink combo that had seen better days. No window. Just the relentless hum of artificial light. "Welcome home, pig," someone shouted from down the block, followed by cruel laughter. The voices blurred into background noise as Owen stood motionless in the center of his cell, fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. This was death row. His new reality. Hours dragged by like molasses. A guard appeared, sliding a plastic food tray through the slot without a word. Owen stared at the gray lump that was supposed to be meatloaf, the lumpy potatoes, the wilted vegetables. His stomach turned. He pushed the tray aside, sinking onto his cot and staring at the blank wall. His attorney would file an appeal. That's what they always did. But deep down, Owen knew he was running out of time. They all did. But Owen knew the statistics. Death row appeals rarely succeeded. The realization hit like a physical blow. He might actually die here, strapped to a table with poison in his veins, for a murder he didn't commit. Across town, Ava watched Atlas pace her apartment for the third straight hour. His food bowl sat untouched, his water barely disturbed. The German shepherd's nails clicked against the hardwood as he moved from the door to the window and back again, letting out occasional whines that cut straight through her. "Come on, boy," she finally said, grabbing his leash. "Let's get some air." Atlas perked up at the sight of it, but the moment they hit the sidewalk, he had his own agenda. He pulled hard, nearly yanking the leash from her grip, moving with purpose toward the waterfront. "Atlas, heel," she commanded, but the dog ignored her. They hadn't been to the docks in months, not since her last case with Owen. Atlas dragged her past the warehouses, his nose working overtime, his urgency making her uneasy. This wasn't just a dog following an old patrol route. This was something else. Back in his cell, Owen lay on his back staring at the ceiling, replaying that final day of freedom. He'd been following leads on Daniel West's murder, reviewing security footage from nearby businesses. Something about the timing hadn't added up. Then suddenly, SWAT, no warning, no explanation, just cuffs and custody. He turned onto his side, the thin mattress offering no comfort. None of it made sense. The evidence against him had come out of nowhere, perfectly packaged, completely damning. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to put him here. The question, keeping him awake, wasn't whether he'd been framed. He knew he had. The real questions were who had done it and why they wanted him to take the fall so badly. The first rays of dawn had yet to touch the sky when Ava jolted awake to Atlas's persistent whining. She groaned, rolling over in bed to squint at the clock. 4:37 a.m. The German shepherd stood beside her, tail low, letting out that same distressed sound he'd made for the past 2 days. "Atlas, please," she mumbled, rubbing a hand over her face. But he wouldn't settle. He paced between her bed and the door, his nails clicking faster. With a sigh, Ava threw back her covers. "Fine, you win." She pulled on a jacket over her pajamas and grabbed his leash. Atlas practically dragged her down 3 flights of stairs to the street. The city was eerily quiet, the occasional delivery truck rumbling past. Again, Atlas pulled toward the waterfront. "What is it with you and the docks lately?" she muttered. But Atlas didn't acknowledge her, nose twitching as he led her past a chain-link fence into the industrial zone. Near an abandoned warehouse, he suddenly stopped, his body tensed. Sniffing aggressively at the dirt near the loading dock, he circled a specific spot. Ava frowned, watching him. Then something caught her eye. A small piece of fabric partially buried in the dirt. Crouching, she carefully picked it up. The material was rough and thick, its charred edges crumbling at her touch. It felt familiar, like the heavy-duty material used in police gear. Later that night, crime scene photos were spread across her kitchen table. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago as she studied every detail. Daniel West's body had been found in civilian clothing. But the scrap of fabric she'd found, it wasn't civilian. She held it up to the light. The weave was industrial grade, tactical gear. Her pulse quickened as the implications sank in. A sharp knock at her door made her jump. She opened it to find Marcus, a court clerk who owed her a favor. "Got that update you wanted," he said, handing her a manila envelope. Owen's appeal had been denied that morning. Across town in his cell, Owen sat perfectly still as his attorney delivered the same news. The words washed over him like white noise. Technical terms about procedural issues and insufficient grounds for appeal. "We knew this might happen," the lawyer said carefully. "But this is just the first step. We can file, save it." Owen cut him off. They both knew how this went. His voice was steady, betraying none of the anger roiling inside him. He'd expected this outcome. It was all part of the plan. Whoever had set him up had done their homework. Back in her apartment, Ava turned the burnt fabric over in her hands. Taking it to the department would be useless. They had closed ranks the moment Owen was arrested. The case was filed away. Forgotten, Atlas lay at her feet, ears suddenly perking up. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Ava frowned, glancing back at the charred cloth. Something about it made her skin crawl. Something was very, very wrong. The morning air was thick with fog as Ava pulled into the empty lot near the docks. Atlas sat in the passenger seat, ears forward, body rigid with focus. This time she came prepared. An evidence collection kit from her detective days. Latex gloves, plastic bags, a few basic tools. "Okay, boy," she murmured, clipping on his leash. "Show me what I missed." Atlas wasted no time, leading her straight to the same spot near the warehouse. His nose worked the ground in tight, urgent circles. Ava knelt beside him, tugging on her gloves. The burnt fabric had been here. What else? She carefully brushed away loose dirt and debris, then froze. A glint of brass caught the weak morning light. Half buried in packed earth was a spent bullet casing. Her hands trembled slightly as she took a photo and carefully pried it from the dirt. 2 hours later, she sat in a cluttered basement lab across town. Dr. Martin Chen, a retired forensic analyst who'd helped her on countless cases, studied the casing under a microscope. "This is interesting," he muttered, scribbling notes. "The striations don't match the ballistics report from the West murder at all." He glanced up at her. "And it's definitely not from Owen's service weapon. Different caliber entirely." Ava's pulse quickened. This was it. Proof. The first real evidence that something was off. "Can you document that officially?" "Already. Doing it," Chen said, reaching for his camera. Back at her apartment, Ava spread out printouts of Daniel West's final articles. The journalist had been working on a series about police corruption. Most were unfinished, but one name appeared over and over. Deputy Chief Marcus Holloway. West had been tracking financial transactions and unexplained promotions. Had he gotten too close? Meanwhile, in his cell, Owen watched Officer Green make his third pass of the morning. The guard's eyes lingered too long. His questions were too specific. "Must be tough," Green said, pausing outside Owen's cell. "Being a cop in here, especially after such a high-profile case." Owen kept his expression neutral. "Just doing my time." Green smirked. "That appeal getting denied. Rough break. But maybe it's better to accept things. Stop fighting what's coming." The words made Owen's skin crawl. Green wasn't just nosy. He was reporting to someone. Someone who wanted to make sure Owen never left this place alive. In her dimly lit apartment, Ava reviewed her notes for the 10th time. The bullet casing was proof. Real, physical proof that could reopen Owen's case. But she needed more. The department wouldn't overturn a conviction on one piece of evidence, not with so many powerful people invested in keeping Owen behind bars. She was about to shut her laptop when Atlas suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood straight, his body tense. Then, a low, rumbling growl Ava's breath caught. She listened. Footsteps. A shadow passed under the door. Her pulse pounded as she watched, frozen. The handle moved, just slightly. Atlas remained beside her, his muscles taut, a continuous growl vibrating deep in his chest. His eyes never left the door. Seconds stretched like hours. Then, the shadow retreated. Ava counted to 30 before approaching the peephole. The hallway was empty. She did a sweep of her apartment. Nothing was disturbed. The windows were locked. Everything was exactly as she had left it. But the timing sent chills through her. She had just found evidence that could prove Owen's innocence. And now this. "Come on, Atlas," she whispered, gathering her things. "We need to go." 20 minutes later, she pulled up outside a modest apartment building in the city's journalism district. Noah Park's place was on the 3rd floor. He answered the door with suspicious eyes that softened when he recognized her. "Detective?" "Mitchell," he said, stepping aside. "This is unexpected." "I need your help," Ava said, pulling out the bullet casing and documents. "It's about Daniel West's murder." Noah's initial skepticism was clear as she laid everything out. Atlas's behavior at the docks, the casing, Dr. Chen's analysis. But then, as he flipped through West's old notes, his expression changed. "Look at this," he murmured. Pulling out a worn notebook, Ava leaned in as he traced over hastily scribbled words. The night before he died, Daniel wrote about meeting someone at the docks. He never said who. Noah frowned. But he was convinced this meeting would break open his whole investigation into police corruption. Ava exhaled. The pieces were falling into place. Meanwhile, in his prison cell, Owen lifted his dinner tray from the slot and froze. Underneath was a small piece of paper. His blood ran cold as he read the message. "Stop asking questions. You're already dead." Back at Noah's apartment, Ava gathered her things to leave. But as she approached her car in the dimly lit parking lot, something caught her eye. A folded piece of paper, tucked under her windshield wiper. Heart pounding, she reached for it with trembling fingers and unfolded it. Ava read the message that made her stomach drop. "This time, we knocked. Next time, we won't." She sat at her kitchen table, the harsh glow of the desk lamp illuminating the threatening note. At her feet, Atlas shifted, occasionally lifting his head to check on her. She hadn't even attempted sleep. Her mind raced through the implications. This wasn't an idle threat. It was calculated, precise. Someone had been watching her, tracking her every move. They knew about the evidence she'd found. They knew about her visit to Noah. This wasn't random harassment. This was a warning from people with resources and reach. When morning finally arrived, Ava wasted no time. She reached out to Luis Vega. As one of West's trusted sources, the ex-con might hold vital information about what the journalist had uncovered before his death. Vega agreed to meet, his voice tense but willing. But when she pulled up to his rundown apartment complex, dread settled in her gut. His door stood wide open, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. Weapon drawn, Ava stepped inside. Este place was wrecked. Furniture overturned, cushions slashed, papers strewn across the floor. Every drawer had been emptied, picture frames shattered, their contents torn to pieces. "Luis," she called. Silence. She knew what it meant. Following protocol, she called it in. Within minutes, officers arrived, treating it like a routine break-in. One of them found Vega's phone, smashed beyond repair, in a dumpster out back. "Looks like your guy skipped town," Martinez said with a shrug. "Ex-con spook easy, probably some old debts catching up to him." But Ava knew better. This wasn't someone running. This was someone being silenced. Meanwhile, in the cold confines of the prison, Owen felt Officer Green's eyes on him constantly. During meals, in the yard, lingering outside his cell longer than necessary. "Something on your mind, Green?" Owen finally asked during lunch, tired of the surveillance. Green stepped closer, voice low and menacing. "There are people outside who don't want you leaving this place alive, Cooper. Don't make it worse for yourself." Owen kept his expression neutral, but inside his mind was racing. The warning confirmed his suspicions. His conviction wasn't just about punishment. Someone wanted him dead. And they were using the system to make it happen legally. Back in the city, Ava's phone buzzed. Noah. His voice was urgent, excited. "I checked the security footage near Vega's apartment. You need to see this. 2 masked men, a black SUV, 3 a.m. He didn't run, Ava. They took him." The early morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of Jerry's Diner, a worn-down establishment on the town's outskirts. Ava slid into the booth across from Noah. He was already on his 3rd cup of coffee, his eyes red-rimmed from hours of reviewing footage. "We're dealing with someone who knows how to work the system," Noah muttered, sliding a USB drive across the table. "This was nearly wiped clean, but I recovered some footage from the docks, timestamped 2 hours before West was killed." Ava plugged it in. They huddled over the screen. The grainy footage showed a figure in a police-issued jacket dragging something heavy out of frame. The quality was poor, but one detail stood out, a distinctive scar on the figure's left hand, caught in the harsh security light. Ava's breath caught. She knew that scar. Had seen it at department meetings, at functions, Deputy Chief Marcus Holloway, a knife wound from years ago, never properly healed. "This could be what we need," she whispered. her hand trembling as she ejected the drive. Meanwhile, in the prison yard, Owen was caught off guard. 3 inmates closed in, coordinated, deliberate. The first punch landed hard in his kidney, dropping him to his knees. He blocked the next hit, but the third man struck from behind. Owen fought back, instincts kicking in, landing solid blows. But they had numbers. One of them pulled a makeshift knife. Before he could react, Officer Green stepped in, baton swinging. The inmates scattered. But as Owen caught his breath, Green leaned down, voice barely above a whisper. "I told you to stop asking questions." Then he walked away, and Owen understood. This wasn't random. It was orchestrated. A message, delivered with fists and threats. Later that night, Ava replayed. The footage mind racing, then knock knock. Atlas tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Heart pounding, Ava grabbed her service weapon and approached the door. Through the peephole, no one. Slowly, she opened it, gun ready. A small cardboard box sat on her welcome mat. With trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. Inside, covered in dried blood, Owen's police badge. Her stomach lurched. This wasn't just another warning, this was a declaration of war. She burst into Noah's apartment without knocking. Owen's bloodied badge clutched in her shaking hands. Noah jumped from his desk, scattering papers. Someone inside the department left this at my door, Ava said, voice tight with anger and fear. This badge was logged in evidence. They're sending us a message. Noah turned it over under the desk lamp. The blood's real. His expression darkened. And you're right. Only someone with access to the evidence locker could have taken this. Ava paced, running a hand through her hair. We need to talk to Owen. He might know something we don't. Calling in a favor from her vice squad days, Ava arranged a private visit to the prison. The guards led her through a maze of stark corridors to a small interview room. Owen entered, his orange jumpsuit stark against the gray walls. His face hardened. At the sight of her, "You shouldn't be here," he warned, voice low, urgent. Ava leaned forward. Atlas found a bullet casing at the docks, different caliber than the murder weapon. Then Luis Vega vanished, dragged into an SUV. And there's footage, Owen, security footage from the dock. Owen listened, jaw tightening. But when she mentioned the scar, the one on the man in the police jacket, his expression shifted. And she knew. He recognized it too. Owen's expression was unreadable, his voice barely above a whisper. It was. His fists clenched on the table. Holloway was the one who arrested me, first on the scene at West's apartment. If anyone could have planted evidence, it was him. The weight of the realization settled over them like a heavy fog. Owen had been framed, and the man behind it was one of the most powerful figures. The department. As Ava walked back to her car, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, and the message on the screen made her blood run cold. This is your final warning. Next time, the dog dies first. She looked over at Atlas in the passenger seat, his tail thumping lightly as he watched her, completely unaware of the threat. Ava's grip on the steering wheel tightened until her knuckles turned white. They had just made this personal. She sat frozen in her car outside the prison, rereading the message. Rage and fear coiled in her chest. Atlas whined softly, sensing her tension. This wasn't just about proving Owen's innocence anymore. They were threatening her partner. Without hesitation, she turned the key in the ignition and headed for the outskirts of town. She knew exactly where to go. Detective Ray Callahan's house was small but fortified. Security cameras at every corner, reinforced locks on the doors. Before she could knock, he opened the door, his weathered face creased with concern. You look like hell, kid, Ray said, stepping aside to let her and Atlas in. In his cluttered living room, Ava laid it all out. The bullet casing Atlas had found, Vega's disappearance, the security footage of Holloway's scarred hand. Ray listened in silence, occasionally jotting notes in a small battered notebook. When she finished, he leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. You're about to go to war with people who don't lose, Ava. Holloway's got friends in every precinct, every courthouse. He's untouchable. No one's untouchable. she said firmly. I need you to dig into his past. There has to be something, anything, we can use. Meanwhile, inside the prison, Owen was escorted down a dimly lit corridor to a different cell block. The official reason was security concerns. He knew better. His new cell was smaller, darker, and came with a surprise. Victor Crane sat on the bottom bunk. Owen recognized him instantly. Former cop from Holloway's unit, convicted of murder 3 years ago. The guards left, and Crane stood, moving in close. His breath was hot against Owen's ear. You're not getting out of here alive. Back. At Ray's house, Ava gathered her notes preparing to leave. A notification flashed on her phone. A new message. An attached photo. She opened it, and her stomach dropped. It was a picture of her apartment door taken from just outside the peephole, centered, perfectly framed, like a bullseye. Hands trembling, she raced home, her mind moving faster than the car. Atlas sat rigid in the passenger seat, ears twitching, sensing her unease. She parked across the street, scanning the area. No suspicious vehicles, no lurking figures, but someone had been there. Stay close, she whispered to Atlas as they moved inside. Gun drawn, she cleared the apartment, room by room. The living room was untouched, the bedroom the same. Then she reached the kitchen. Her breath caught. A manila envelope sat on the wooden table. It hadn't been there before. With gloved hands, she opened it. Crime scene photos spilled out. Stark, brutal images of Daniel West's murder. The exact position of his body. The angle of the gunshot. Details never released to the public. Among them, a single white note card. Stop digging, or you'll end up just like him. Ava's pulse pounded in her ears. These photos came from the official case file. Files only accessible to someone inside the department. Someone was watching her every move. She grabbed her phone and called Noah. Meet me at the Red Pine Motel, she said quietly. Room 115, and Noah, make sure you're not followed. The Red Pine Motel was the kind of place people went to disappear. Peeling paint, a flickering neon sign, not a security camera in sight. Perfect, Ava arrived first, checking in under a false name. Atlas stayed alert at her side. Noah arrived 20 minutes later, gripping his laptop bag like a lifeline. Despite the hour, his eyes were bright with adrenaline. I got into the police personnel files, he said, shutting the door behind him. Holloway's records, something's off. His travel logs the night West was killed don't match his official report. He claimed he was at a conference in Springfield, but his vehicle GPS puts him here. Ava spread the crime scene photos across the bed. These were left in my apartment, she said. Someone's trying to scare us. They moved fast, connecting the dots. West's murder, Holloway's involvement, Owen's frame-up. Atlas lay near the door, seemingly relaxed, but his ears flicked at every sound. Then his body went rigid. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Before Ava or Noah could react, the motel window shattered inward with a deafening crack. Gunfire. Glass sprayed. Crossed the room as they dropped to the floor. Atlas barked, his body tense and ready. Another shot ripped through the wooden door, sending splinters flying. Ava's instincts kicked in. Rolling behind the bed, she drew her gun and fired too quick. Shots through the broken window. Silence, then the distant screech of tires. Are you hit? She called, eyes scanning for movement. Noah, crouched behind the bathroom doorframe, shook his head. No, but we need to get out of here. They grabbed their evidence and bolted for Ava's car. Atlas led the way, scanning the darkness for threats. As they sped away, Ava stuck to back roads, checking the rearview mirror constantly. I know somewhere we can go, she said, knuckles white on the wheel. Ray has a cabin in the woods. Off the grid. No one else knows about it. Beside her, Noah flipped open his laptop. I found something else while digging through records. His voice was steadier now. 3 days after West was murdered, Holloway made a wire transfer to a Cayman Islands account. Ava's jaw tightened. How much? $200,000, blood money, a payoff to keep someone quiet. Meanwhile, inside the prison, Owen fought his own battle. Victor Crane attacked during yard time. To the guards, it looked like any other prison fight. But Owen knew better. Crane's strikes were too sharp, too practiced. He blocked a jab aimed at his throat and countered hard, sending Crane stumbling back. Guards rushed in, breaking them apart, but the message was clear. Someone wanted Owen dead. The cabin appeared as a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. Hidden deep in the woods, it was exactly what they needed. Small, secure, impossible to find without knowing where to look. Atlas leaped out first, circling the perimeter as Ava and Noah carried their equipment inside. Ava exhaled, running a hand through her hair. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to believe they might be safe. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Nice try, detective, but we always know where to find you. Ice spread through her veins. She rushed to the window, peering out. The trees swayed gently in the wind, but she knew someone was out there, watching. The cabin groaned through the night, wind whispering through the trees. Every creak, every snap of a twig made Ava's muscles tense. She sat in an old armchair, gun within reach, eyes fixed on the shadows outside. Atlas hadn't left her side. His warm body pressed against her legs, ears flicking at each sound. Noah sat hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, bathed in the glow of the screen. He'd been working non-stop, digging deeper into West's files. Suddenly, his voice cut through the quiet. Ava, I found something. She moved behind him, eyes locked on the screen. A folder, labeled Insurance Encrypted. Can you crack it? Noah's. Fingers flew over the keyboard. Give me time. Hours passed. Atlas paced the room while Ava sorted through their evidence. Then, finally, Noah let out a triumphant sound. I'm in. The folder opened. West's personal notes. Ava leaned closer, heart pounding as she read the final entries. West had arranged a meeting with someone inside the department, someone who knew what Holloway was doing. The location? The docks. The same place Atlas had found that bullet casing. Ava's stomach dropped. He never made it to that meeting, she whispered, because whoever he was supposed to meet, whoever held the truth, was dead. Meanwhile, inside the sterile walls of the prison, Owen sat across from Ray Callahan. The retired detective looked older than Owen remembered, worry lines carved deep into his face. Ray exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. I've been making calls, he said. Ray's weathered face creased as he scanned the room. Ava sat in a dimly lit booth near the back, a glass of untouched whiskey in front of her. He approached slowly, his usual confident stride replaced with something heavier. You sounded urgent, Ray said, sliding into the booth across from her. Ava forced herself to meet his eyes, searching for something. Remorse, guilt, anything. Yeah, she said, her voice tight. We need to talk about Daniel West and Owen Cooper. Ray's expression didn't change. That's a dangerous conversation, kid. Ava exhaled sharply. Kid, like she was still the rookie who hung on his every word. She pushed the phone across the table. The screen glowed with West's final recording. Ray hesitated. Then he pressed play. There's someone else. West's voice crackled through the peaker. Someone who helped set up Cooper. Ava watched Ray's face as the recording played, but he gave away nothing. Not even when his name was spoken. The recording ended, silence stretched between them. Say something, Ava finally demanded. Ray let out a long breath. You were always a smart one, he muttered. Guess I should have seen this coming. Ava's stomach twisted. That wasn't a denial. You framed Owen, she whispered. You helped Holloway cover up West's murder. Ray leaned forward, his fingers laced together. It wasn't that simple. Then explain it to me. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. You think you know how deep this runs? How many people are in on this? Enough to fast-track Owen's execution, she shot back. Ray flinched. I didn't want this to happen, he admitted. But once I was in, there was no getting out. Holloway doesn't forgive mistakes, and neither do the people above him. Ava stared at him. Who's above him? Ray hesitated. Then in a low voice he said, You don't want to know. She gritted her teeth. The hell I don't. Ray shook his head. You don't get it, Ava. You push any further and you're next. Ava's jaw clenched. I'll take my chances. Ray exhaled. Walk away. Forget this. Ava scoffed. That's not who I am. Ray studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed, pushing back from the table. Then I'm sorry, he said quietly. But I can't help you. He stood, tossing a few bills on the table for show. Then he turned and walked away, eyes peering into the night. Ava's hands trembled as she grabbed her phone. Noah picked up on the first ring. How'd it go? Ray's involved, she said, voice hollow. And I think he just gave me a warning. Noah was silent for a moment. Then he said, We need to move, now. Across town, Owen ran. Alarms blared behind him as guards swarmed the yard. Spotlights swept the ground, searching. But Owen had planned for this. He dove through the gap between two supply sheds, pressing himself into the shadows. Footsteps pounded past him. Shouts echoed through the night. He forced himself to breathe, slow and steady. Then, when the moment was right, he moved. The outer fence was just ahead, the last barrier between him and freedom. But as he reached it, a flashlight beam swept toward him. Stop! A voice shouted. Owen didn't think. He climbed, hands grabbed at his legs, but he kicked free. The fence rattled beneath him as he hauled himself over the top. Then he hit the ground running. Behind him, gunfire erupted. He didn't stop, didn't look back, because Owen Cooper had one goal now: find Ava and end this. Ray grabbed her wrist. Before she could stand, This isn't just some bust, Ava, this is a war, he warned. Ava yanked free, her eyes burning. Then it's time to end it. Noah's fingers flew over the keyboard. I'm sending you the exact coordinates. If Holloway's there, he won't be alone. Ava nodded, slipping her phone into her pocket. You coming? She asked, looking at Ray. Ray hesitated. Then, with a heavy sigh, he reached for his gun. Yeah, guess I am. Back at the warehouse, Owen worked the rope harder. The fibers dug into his skin, burning, but he felt the tension shift slightly. He kept his movement slow, careful not to draw attention. Holloway watched him with amusement. You know, Cooper, I almost respect you. He swirled his whiskey. You just don't quit, even when it's hopeless. Owen bared his teeth in a grim smile. Guess that's something we have in common. Holloway chuckled. No. The difference is, I always win. Owen felt the rope loosen. The guards weren't watching. Closely enough, they thought he was broken. Their mistake. At that moment, the warehouse door burst open. Gunfire erupted. Ava! Owen didn't hesitate. He ripped free of his bindings, lunging for the pipe. The nearest guard turned, but Owen was faster, swinging the pipe into his ribs. The man crumpled. More. Shots rang out. Holloway dove behind cover, barking orders. Owen ducked, adrenaline surging through him. Ava's voice cut through the chaos. Owen! He turned just in time to see her and Ray pushing forward, taking down guards with precision. Then he saw Holloway, slipping toward a side door. No. Ignoring the pain in his shoulder, Owen sprinted after him. Holloway threw open the door, disappearing into the alley. Owen followed. The cold night air hit him like a slap. Holloway was already halfway to a waiting black sedan. Not this time. Owen pushed his body harder, closing the distance. Holloway yanked open the car door, but Owen tackled him before he could get inside. They hit the pavement hard. Holloway snarled, throwing a punch, but Owen barely felt it. He drove his fist into Holloway's jaw, knocking him back. The car door slammed shut as the driver peeled away, leaving Holloway behind. The crime boss wiped blood from his mouth, laughing breathlessly. You think this changes anything? Owen grabbed his collar, hauling him up. Yeah, he said, I do. Sirens wailed in the distance. Ava and Ray appeared in the alley, guns raised. Owen let Holloway slump against the brick wall. It's over, Ava said. Holloway just smirked. For me? Or for you? But for the first time, Owen saw something in Holloway's eyes. Fear, and that was enough. Ava clutched her bleeding side. Breath sharp, but her eyes stayed locked on Holloway. Yeah, she said, voice unwavering. I do. The sirens swelled, red and blue lights flickering through the warehouse windows. Heavy footsteps pounded against pavement. Backup had arrived. Atlas backed off, his growl still rumbling low in his throat. Holloway cradled his torn wrist, his face pale with pain and rage. Ray kept his gun steady. "On your knees." Holloway hesitated, jaw tight. Then, with a slow, measured exhale, he sank down. The doors burst open, officers flooding in, weapons raised. Two moved in fast, wrenching Holloway's arms behind his back, slapping cuffs onto his wrists. "Marcus Holloway," one officer said, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and corruption." Holloway barely reacted. He turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Owen. "You should have stayed locked up, Cooper," he muttered. "This isn't over." Owen wiped blood from his mouth, giving a wry, exhausted smile. "Yeah, we'll see." As Holloway was hauled toward the waiting squad cars, Owen turned to Ava, his brow creased. "You all right?" Ava nodded, though her fingers remained tight against the wound. "I'll manage." Ray exhaled, shaking his head. "Hell of a night." Owen let out a rough chuckle, wincing as pain flared through his ribs. "Yeah, let's not make..." Through habit. Outside, the night air was sharp, the city quiet for the first time in a long time. No idea how deep this goes. Ava and Owen's eyes met across the warehouse floor, both knowing this victory might only be the beginning. The arrest of Marcus Holloway should have been the end, but something felt off. Evidence started disappearing. From the police archives, first the original ballistics report, then key witness statements. Someone was still working behind the scenes trying to bury the truth. 3 more files went missing this morning, Noah said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "They're getting sloppy, though. I managed to back everything up." The process of clearing Owen's name dragged on. The department, embarrassed by the scandal, tried to handle things quietly, but Ava and Noah had other plans. They compiled everything, the recordings, the missing evidence, Holloway's operation, and sent it to every major news outlet in the city. The story exploded. Headlines screamed about police corruption and cover-ups. The public demanded answers, and for once the department couldn't sweep it under the rug. Owen's exoneration came through on a Tuesday morning. That same afternoon, Ray Callahan showed up at Ava's apartment. He looked tired, older somehow. "I'm leaving town," he said simply. "Too many people want me dead now." He glanced between Ava and Owen, who were reviewing case files at her kitchen table. Atlas watched him warily from his spot by Owen's feet. "I never thought you two would actually pull this off," Ray admitted, shaking his head. Owen's voice was cold. "You're lucky we didn't kill you." Ray's mouth twisted into a knowing smirk. Without another word, he turned and walked away into the darkness. Ava and Owen stood on her balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The media frenzy was already dying down, replaced by newer scandals and fresher outrage. Life moved on. Weeks passed. The beach was quiet except for the gentle lap of waves. Owen sat in the sand, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on his face. Atlas dozed beside him, occasionally twitching in his sleep. The sound of footsteps in the sand made him look up. Ava approached, 2 beers in hand. She tossed one his way and settled down next to him. "So what now?" she asked, looking out at the orange-streaked horizon. Owen took a long drink before answering. "We keep going." Atlas let out a contented sigh between them as the sun dipped lower. For the first time in years, Owen took a deep, free breath. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds of Ava's office as she pored over financial records spread across her desk. Most people believed the case was closed. Marcus Holloway was behind bars, awaiting trial in a maximum security prison, but something didn't sit right with her. Atlas lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head when she muttered to herself. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed a pattern in the records, a series of wire transfers from an offshore account that should have been frozen weeks ago. "This is impossible," she whispered, reaching for her phone to call Owen. Within an hour, Owen and Noah were in her office, examining the evidence. Noah's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard as he traced the money trail These transactions, Noah said, pointing to his screen, are being routed through shell companies, but they all lead to one place. Riverdale Maximum Security Prison. Owen leaned forward, his jaw tightening. The warden, James Morrison, Ava confirmed, pulling up his file. He's been there for 15 years. Spotless record. But these numbers don't lie. He's received over $500,000 in the past month alone. They dug deeper, Noah hacking into encrypted emails while Ava and Owen called their remaining trusted contacts inside the prison system. The picture that emerged was chilling. Holloway had effectively turned his cell into a command center, with Morrison ensuring he had everything he needed to continue operating. Their suspicions were confirmed when the news broke. Guard Timothy. Chen was found dead in Holloway's cell block. Chen had been a key witness in the case against Holloway, his testimony crucial to the conviction. This isn't a coincidence, Owen said, pacing Ava's office. Chen was about to testify again at the federal trial. Ava's phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering, putting it on speaker. Detective Mitchell, a familiar voice, drawled. Holloway. I've been expecting your call. Ava's hand tightened around the phone. How did you get this number? Holloway's laugh echoed through the speaker. I told you, Detective. You think this is over? He paused, the amusement fading into something darker. I'm just getting started. The line went dead, leaving them in stunned silence. Atlas growled softly, sensing the tension in the room. The federal prosecutor, Jenna Chen, leaned back in her chair, studying the evidence spread across her desk. Owen and Ava had spent the last hour making their case, explaining how Holloway was still operating his network from inside prison. We need him in complete isolation, Owen insisted. No visitors, no phone calls, no contact with other inmates. Chen shook her head. Without concrete proof of ongoing criminal activity, I can't justify that level of restriction. The prison board won't approve it. Just then, Ava's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Park, 20 minutes. Come alone. She recognized Ray's cryptic style immediately. I need to handle something, she said, standing up. Owen, finish briefing Ms. Chen. At the park, Ray waited in the shadows of an old oak tree. He looked different, thinner, with graying stubble and tired eyes. Holloway's planning something big, he said without preamble. He's arranged an escape during his upcoming transfer to federal custody. Ava's pulse quickened. How do you know? I still have contacts. His people are going to hit the transport, and they've got everything planned. Routes, timing, backup plans. It's happening next week. Back at Ava's apartment, she and Owen finalized their counterplan, glancing at Atlas, who lay between them, ears twitching every time Holloway's name was mentioned. We feed them false intel, Owen suggested. Make them think the transfer is happening a day early. When they show up, Ava finished. We'll be waiting, with SWAT and FBI backup. Ray played his part perfectly, slipping misinformation through his prison contacts. They confirmed Holloway had taken the bait, gloating even about his imminent escape. There's one more thing, Ava said, glancing down at Atlas. The dog met her gaze, alert. He's found more evidence than most detectives. Owen nodded. He's earned it. They positioned SWAT teams along the fake transport route, FBI agents concealed at strategic points. Ava and Owen waited in an unmarked car, Atlas sitting tense in the back seat. Over their earpieces, reports came in, all clear, from various teams. Now they waited. Atlas suddenly stiffened, ears pricking forward. Ava checked her watch, right on time. In the distance, black SUVs crept forward, all. It's hold position, Owen whispered into his radio. Let them make the first move. The SUVs spread out, boxing in what they believed was the prison transport. Armed men spilled out, weapons raised. Now, Ava breathed. Floodlights snapped on, blinding Holloway's men. SWAT teams emerged. From the shadows, FBI agents closed in. The night exploded with gunfire and shouted commands. Marcus Torres, Holloway's right hand, dropped first, 2 sniper shots taking him down cleanly. The gunfight was over almost as quickly as it had begun, but something was wrong. Holloway was missing. "He's not here," Ava called out, frustration sharp in her voice. He knew. Owen scanned the area, jaw tightening. "Split up. He's close." They combed the compound, methodically checking every darkened corner. Atlas padded alongside Ava, nose to the ground. Suddenly, the dog stopped, muscles taut. Then he bolted, leading them to a decrepit maintenance shed. Inside, beneath rotting floorboards, was a tunnel. "Clever," Owen muttered, drawing his weapon. The tunnel was narrow, dim emergency lights casting eerie red glows along the concrete walls. Then, footsteps ahead. A voice echoed through the passage. "You've been a real pain, Detective." Holloway stepped from the shadows, gun leveled, smirk in place. "Let's end this, shall we?" Owen moved first, knocking the weapon aside. They collided, fists flying. Holloway was strong. His time in prison had hardened him. A sharp uppercut sent Owen reeling against the tunnel wall. Holloway advanced, ready to finish it. He'd forgotten about Atlas. The dog lunged, powerful jaws clamping onto Holloway's arm. He screamed, trying to shake the dog loose. Owen seized his chance, pushed off the wall, and with every ounce of strength left, drove his fist into Holloway's temple. Holloway crumpled. Ava moved in fast, snapping cuffs around his wrists. "Marcus Holloway," she said, satisfaction in her voice. "You're under arrest." They emerged from the tunnel, FBI agents waiting. This time, there would be no escape, no deals. His network was exposed, his allies captured or turned. As Holloway was hauled into a waiting vehicle, Owen, Ava, and Atlas stood together, watching. The man who had nearly destroyed them was finally gone. Weeks passed, washing away the last remnants of the fight. Owen stood in the police chief's office as his record was officially cleared. The chief slid his badge across the desk. "Welcome back, Detective Cooper." Owen shook his head. "I'm done with the badge," he told Ava later as they walked through the park. Atlas trotted ahead, tail wagging freely. "I just want to live." Ava understood. She faced her own crossroads. The brass had offered her a promotion, detective sergeant, her own unit, a substantial pay raise. But the offer felt hollow. She had spent years watching the system protect itself. One morning, she walked into the chief's office and handed in her resignation. The decision felt right, like taking a deep breath after being underwater too long. She set her jaw with determination. Ray stared at her for a long moment before cursing under his breath. He grabbed his gun from the desk drawer, checking the magazine. "Damn it, kid. Let's go save your idiot partner." Back in the warehouse, Owen felt the rope give slightly around his wrists. His heart quickened, but he kept his expression neutral as Holloway approached, leaning in until their faces were inches apart. "Your execution is still happening, Cooper," Holloway said, his breath reeking of expensive whiskey. "Just not in the way you expected." The guards moved toward Owen, their boots scraping against concrete. But this time, Owen wasn't helpless. This time, he was ready. Owen's muscles tensed as he felt the rope finally give way. In one fluid motion, he snapped his hands free and lunged for the metal pipe lying nearby. The cold steel felt solid in his grip as he swung hard, connecting with the first guard's knee. A sickening crack echoed through the warehouse, followed by the guard's howl of pain as he crumpled to the ground. The second guard fumbled for his weapon, but Owen was faster. He kicked the nearby table with all his strength, sending it crashing into the guard. The gun skittered across the concrete floor. Owen dove for it, his fingers just brushing the grip, when the third guard slammed into him from behind. They hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from Owen's lungs. The guard's fist connected with his jaw, stars exploding behind his eyes. Owen fought back, landing a solid punch to the man's ribs. They rolled across the floor, trading brutal blows. Through the chaos, Holloway remained eerily calm. He set down his whiskey glass with deliberate care and walked unhurriedly to the exit. The heavy steel door closed behind him with a definitive click of the lock. He had no intention of getting his hands dirty. That's what his men were for. Outside the warehouse, Ava and Ray moved silently through the shadows. They found 2 perimeter guards by the back entrance, subduing them with precise strikes. Neither Ava nor Ray spoke. Their mutual distrust hung between them like a wall, but right now Owen's life mattered more than their suspicions. Inside, Owen grappled with the last standing guard. His body ached from the fight, but adrenaline kept him moving. They crashed into a stack of rusted machinery, metal parts scattering across the floor. Owen's hand found a jagged piece of scrap metal. Without hesitation, he drove it into his attacker's side. The guard gasped and stumbled backward, clutching the wound before collapsing. Breathing heavily, Owen staggered to his feet. He limped to the locked door and kicked it with everything he had left. The door burst open, and there stood Holloway, his gun aimed squarely at Owen's head. Before Holloway could squeeze the trigger, a shot cracked through the air. Holloway jerked backward, blood blooming on his sleeve as the bullet tore through his arm. He stumbled, his face contorting in pain and shock. Ava and Ray stood in the warehouse entrance, their weapons trained steadily on Holloway. "Hands where I can see them," Ava commanded, her voice as cold as steel. Holloway's laughter echoed through the warehouse, dark and unsettling. Despite the blood soaking his sleeve, his eyes gleamed with a dangerous light as he sneered at them. "You really think you can stop this?" He shook his head, almost amused. "You have no proof." Ava stepped forward, her gun never wavering from his chest. "Actually, we do." Ray moved smoothly, tossing a small black device onto the concrete floor. The recorder clattered between them, its red light blinking steadily. It had captured everything since they entered the warehouse. Every threat, every admission. "It's over," Owen said, moving to stand beside Ava. His voice was steady, certain, but Holloway's smile didn't fade. In one fluid motion, he reached behind his back and pulled out a concealed knife. The blade glinted in the dim light as he lunged at Ava. She squeezed the trigger, but Holloway was faster than they expected. He knocked her gun aside, the knife slashing across her side. Ava stumbled backward with a sharp gasp, pressing her hand against the spreading red stain on her shirt. Owen didn't hesitate. He charged forward, ramming into Holloway with his full weight. They crashed together, trading vicious blows. Holloway fought like a cornered animal, all precision lost to desperate fury. With a sudden twist, Holloway gained the upper hand. He slammed Owen against a metal beam, pinning him there. The knife rose high, ready for a killing stroke. That's when Atlas struck. The dog burst through the warehouse entrance like a furious shadow, launching himself at Holloway. His powerful jaws clamped down on Holloway's wrist, drawing a scream of pain from the man. The knife clattered to the floor as Atlas's teeth dug deeper. Ray moved swiftly, snatching up Ava's fallen gun. He aimed it at Holloway's head, his expression grim. "You're done, Marcus." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. By the second, Ava had managed to call it in before they entered the warehouse. As the sound of approaching backup filled the air, Holloway's face twisted into a bitter smile. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed through clenched teeth. "You have no idea how deep this goes." Ava and Owen's eyes met across the warehouse floor, both knowing this victory might only be the beginning.